From the Matrix Home Solutions studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560 The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is a chairman of the Marxist caucus in the House. I think they call themselves progressive. She's sort of a gorgon, according to a BuzzFeed piece on what she's like to work for. There were some staffers and former staffers that had some very interesting things to say about this socialist Spice Girl.
Really?
Representative Jayapal, yeah. But she was on CNN talking to, one of those fungible dum-dums about this quid pro quo that the socialists have set up amongst themselves. The Senate has to give us $3.5 billion over in the House before we'll release the $1.2 trillion infrastructure spend that's passed the Senate and is in the House. And that has to happen by September 27th, which is, next week, because that was the date that was set. And if it doesn't happen, perhaps nothing would happen. Wouldn't that be a happy occurrence? Here's what she had to say about how this plays out and how willing she is to, on behalf of her 94 members, how willing she is to deal on the deal that was struck.
We've got to be able to say to the American people that we are not going to wait on child care. We're not going to wait on paid leave. We're not going to wait on health care. It isn't enough just to do this much smaller roads and bridges bill. We've got to get the other pieces done as well that are so urgent. So we've already told the Speaker that. Over half of our caucus has said that they would not be able to vote for one bill without the other. And so we are doing everything we can to get the work done before this deadline, which I just want to say was imposed by conservative Democrats who wanted to see the bipartisan bill come up first. And so they put this deadline on of September 27th. We said at the time that deadline was made that's great, but if we don't have the reconciliation bill, we will not be able to vote for the infrastructure bill. So at the end of the day, our commitment is both bills to the president.
So you're saying you're willing to take nothing because it may come to that?
Well, I'm actually saying that other people are willing to crash the entire Democratic agenda by refusing to come together on the reconciliation bill, which was the promise that was made.
And among those other people she's referring to are 11 Senate Democrat socialists, from your Cory Bookers and Ed Markey's to your Pocahontases and Sheldon White People Only House. So what will come of this? Let's discuss this with our next guest. He's Phil Kerpen, president of the American Commitment, chairman of the Internet Freedom Coalition as well. Phil, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, great to be with you.
Such luminaries as Sheldon White's Only and Pocahontas on one side and AOC and Jayapal and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar on the other side. What is a socialist to do in these times?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Look, I don't want to get my hopes up that it'll all collapse. By the way, isn't it funny that she called the so-called infrastructure bill the Roads and Bridges bill, which is like,
right,
I don't know, 15% of the bill or something like that?
Well, I also like to. That's one good point. The other thing about that, a much smaller. I remember when $1.2 trillion was a lot of government spending, but that's not.
Right,
that's
on top of the
nothing to her.
1.9 they spent a couple months ago, right?
Yeah, right.
It's an incredible situation, frankly, because I'm against both of these bills. They're both massive, corrupt spending bills that we don't need, that are going to reignite inflation. And yet they're having this bizarre fight over, do we take the $1.2 trillion now, or do we wait until we can pair it up with the other 3.5? And they use gimmicks, so it won't really be 3.5; it'll be 5, but they'll say it's 3.5. And it's remarkable to see them struggle the way they are. If we're lucky, it'll all sort of collapse of its own weight. I suspect at the end of the day they agree on something. They steer more money to West Virginia, and Manchin says, "Okay, now I'm good with it," and they manage to move it all through. But at the moment, they're in disarray, and it's pretty enjoyable to watch.
And there's another piece of this too. We were talking about it a little bit yesterday with Indiana Senator Mike Braun. I wonder if this factors in what you know. So they've done a pared down federal takeover of election administration in this country, and to try to appease Manchin, Schumer has, and you wonder if that's another piece that's not getting enough discussion in terms of, all right, we're going to give you a victory on the election reform thing, but you got to come and give us, at least I don't know, something close to 100% of what we want, so we can get these socialists in the House off our back, and then you get a pared down but still horribly problematic federal takeover elections, and you get something close to the $5 trillion in new spend that has been put forward.
Well, I think that's more about kind of political talking points than legislating, because I don't see them convincing him to nuke the filibuster, and that means even if they got him to sign on to an election reform bill, because that's something they cannot do under the reconciliation process, 50 votes wouldn't get it done on that. They would need 60 unless they somehow convinced him it's time to nuke the filibuster. But I think he's had so many statements that's something he would just never do, that I would be surprised if they could convince him to do that. Even if he did sign on to a bill, if they could convince him to nuke the filibuster over that issue, I'd be very surprised.
Well, then why are you, sort of guardedly optimistic only about the idea that this spending gambit may go down, if considering Manchin's position on the $3.5 trillion?
Well, I don't think it'll be 3.5, or at least, the thing is, these scores are all deceptive anyway. So, I mean, if they say it's 3.5, it's probably really 5. When they say that it's the 1.5 or 2 that he'll eventually agree to, it'll probably really be 3.5. But the thing is that he is focused on the number more so than the policy, and they want to get all these vast new welfare programs, the forced Medicaid expansion to able-bodied childless adults in the 11 holdout states, including Texas and Florida. That's one of the central provisions of this. They want the paid leave benefit made permanent. They want the universal government-funded nursery school. And they'll put phase out dates, or they'll put gimmicks in there to get a lower number, and then he'll say, great, I got the number. But they'll have the policies, which is what they really want. And so that's what I really fear is going to happen, is they'll make compromises that are sort of budgetary gimmicks, but they'll get the policies in place that they want, and he'll eventually go along with it.
All right, Phil, let's move on to COVID, because you crunched the numbers and found out that the seasonal flu is way more dangerous to kids than COVID.
Well, it's pretty comparable. I wouldn't necessarily say way more dangerous, but it's pretty comparable. And the reason I had been running those numbers, then I stopped for a while, sort of doing the regular weekly updates, and then there was this astonishing Fauci interview where he said that more kids have died of COVID than we've ever seen with flu, which is completely untrue. And so I checked the numbers and verified that it is untrue. And what he was doing, which was extraordinarily dishonest, is he was using the confirmed pediatric flu deaths from recent years as the comparator. But that's the wrong comparator, because we don't hypertest for flu the way we hypertest for COVID. And so flu is substantially under-ascertained in the count, which is why CDC has a statistical model they run every year. And there's a whole explanation on the CDC website of why the statistical model are the numbers that are much more accurate than the confirmed count. And so if you use the modeled deaths, they're substantially higher in a lot of recent years than what we've seen with COVID. And of course, we have the opposite problem with COVID. We've got overcounting, which is why when they ran the statistical model for COVID, they didn't run the straight model, which I think would have produced a substantially lower number in the pediatric age range than what they've been publishing. Instead, they've got a footnote at the bottom of their statistical model that says for the deaths column, we used the official death certificate count as a floor and only ran the model on the rest of the deaths. And So I think that if you do anything close to an apples-to-apples comparison, at least half and maybe more of recent years had higher pediatric flu deaths than what we've seen with COVID. And one of the aspects of COVID that's been really interesting and sort of underexplained is that it doesn't come in addition to flu, it comes instead of flu. And everywhere where COVID's been epidemic, flu goes to zero. And it has nothing to do with masks or distancing or any of the policies that have been put in place, because the same thing happened in Sweden, the same thing happened in Brazil. It happened everywhere in the world. You have a lot of COVID, you don't have flu. They seem to compete with each other like the same way flu A and B do to a certain extent. When one is big, the other sort of recedes. And so we've had COVID instead of flu for the last year and a half, and as a result, children have been at no greater risk of respiratory illness, hospitalization, and death than they were in any other year. So for children, it is a completely normal virus, exactly in the normal range of what we've seen, every year forever.
Right, and so the response is what is abnormal, to be generous. This thread from a primary care physician, this is really interesting, and because it also folds in OSHA, which has become I know it's occupational safety and health, but it's just become part of the safetiest state apparatus, and you can outsource things that you can't do by edict to this element in the fourth branch of government, the administrative state. He tweeted out, as a primary care physician, I've been on the front line treating COVID patients in office since June 1 of last year. I've had COVID myself, and since I've been up close and personal with many more in small rooms, no problems. On a normal clinic day, I average about 30 patients. We screen our patients when making appointments, then at the door before entry with questions and a temperature. As is protocol, even though worthless, we wear surgical masks and scrubs that are easy to launder each day. So this week, I just found out that OSHA decided to weigh in 19 months later about how we have to see patients. Starting October 1st, I will now have to wear full PPE, along with a fitted N95, along with goggles, all of which will be changed out between each of the 30 patients. My nurse will have to do the same. I see 120 patients a week. Thus, between the two of us, our employer will be purchasing 240 pairs of PPE, masks, goggles, so I can walk in a room and scare patients I've been seeing for the past 15 months in order to fill their medicines and manage their care. We truly live in clown world, writes this doctor.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to the requirements that are being put on our healthcare providers, especially this late in the game. And you've got all these healthcare providers that have been out there providing care, throughout the whole thing. And a lot of them have already had COVID, and then they're being told, you have to don and doff full PPE 1 million times a day, and every single nurse has to be vaccinated. And a lot of them are saying, I've been through it. I've been doing this all along. You're supposed to be appreciative of everything I've been doing, not put all kinds of new requirements on me. And we're going to have a staffing shortage because almost every healthcare provider is now dealing with, some percentage of people saying, I'm gone, it's too much, I'm not dealing with this. And we're, I think, losing sight of the fact that basically, all of these people have been exposed. All of them have been exposed, and they were willing to do that. They were willing to do that to do their jobs, and now you're saying, we don't care that you've already been exposed. We're going to put all of these requirements on you anyway when there's no upside. There's no benefit for people who've already been exposed. So I find it ridiculous, and you kind of wonder, when are they ever going to be able to withdraw these rules also? I mean, is this just what healthcare is going to look like in this country going forward? Is they're going to be in these spacesuits and you're never going to see your doctor face to face again? So I do really worry about how extreme they've gotten with this and what the exit plan is, because I don't see one.
Phil Kerpen, president of the American Commitment, chairman of the Internet Freedom Coalition as well. Phil, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs. Ford making a $50 million investment